I used to think the worst part of betrayal was the moment you discovered it. But I learned something more painful. Betrayal begins long before the truth finally reaches you. It begins quietly, like tidewater pushing under the foundations of a house, slow, steady, unnoticed, until you realize the ground you trusted isn't there anymore. It took a ferry pass to reveal the first crack. I'm Darren, 42, a structural inspector based in Tacoma. My work takes me through old buildings, waterfront homes, and the occasional island contract. I've always had an eye for detail: cracks in concrete, stress on load-bearing beams, shifts in foundation lines. People think that makes me meticulous. In truth, it makes me good at noticing things that don't fit long before they break. My wife Ivy was always the freer one, the artist, the sunlight in the room, the kind of person who made home feel less like a structure and more like a place where you exhale. We'd been together for 11 years, long enough to have built a world with our children. Talon, 10, quiet and thoughtful, and June, 7, fearless and full of questions. My mother, Teresa, still lives in Tacoma. My father, Gordon, is gone. My younger sister, Kara, drops by with garden cuttings and opinions. Ivy's parents, Philip and Nora, are retired and very alive, quick to visit, quicker to leave notes about screen time. We were, by any outsider's measure, stable. Not perfect, but steady. A house with a reliable frame. Our family kept a 10-ride wave-to-go multi-ride ferry pass for weekend errands, occasional island trips, and the times I needed to cross for building inspections. Those passes usually lasted us months. You buy them at a discount, print the confirmation, and scan it at the terminal until the rides run out. But early that spring, the pass was disappearing far too fast. I had used it only twice. Our kids hadn't been anywhere, yet the balance kept shrinking. Then I checked our bank statements. Weekend after weekend, there were charges labeled WSF, vehicle fare, Point Defiance Tahlequah, WSF, auto reload, multi-ride pass, all tied to days Ivy claimed she was on Vashon for her arts workshop. A multi-ride pass does not vanish like that unless someone is taking repeated crossings. And a vehicle fare charge only appears when your car rolls onto the ferry and gets its plate scanned. It wasn't my truck making those trips. And Ivy never mentioned needing the ferry for anything except one-day arts prep. The pattern wasn't screaming, it was whispering. But that whisper was enough. That Friday morning, Ivy left before sunrise. She said she needed to prepare materials for an arts workshop. She kissed our children and told them she'd bring something back for them, and drove away with her easel and tote bag. I watched her taillights fade down the street, and something inside me felt wrong, though I couldn't name it yet. Instinct speaks before language. I dropped the kids at school, then called my mother, Teresa, to see if she could stay with them. Mom told me she'd arrive by the time the kids returned home. She didn't ask why. She only said, "I'll be there." And that was enough. By mid-morning, I parked near Point Defiance Park, where the ferry terminal sat folded into the trees. The sky was the kind of Pacific Northwest gray that carries its own silence. I found a discreet parking spot and watched the steady rhythm of daily travelers. Cars lined up, lights dimmed under the terminal overhang, and ferries slid back and forth across the water with the patience of something that has been doing its job for 100 years. I told myself I wasn't expecting anything. I was only gathering information. But the truth is, I already knew I wasn't going home without answers. The hours moved with the slow certainty of suspicion. One ferry arrived. Another left. People came and went. And then, near nightfall, a familiar blue crossover eased into the entrance lane. Ivy's, and she wasn't alone. A man sat in the passenger seat. Brent. Someone I recognized vaguely from photos she'd shown me of her arts committee. He wasn't touching her. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't making any move that a stranger would question. He had the demeanor of someone who had practiced looking ordinary in places where it wouldn't be. Her SUV rolled toward the terminal checkpoint, slowing just enough for the plate scanner to pick it up before she eased forward with the vehicles waiting to board. She'd taken this route often enough to move through it without hesitation. I joined another lane several cars behind. My heartbeat didn't spike. The worst truths don't shock you. They confirm what your body already knew, but your mind didn't want to admit. When the ferry began loading, I kept my gaze low, hands on the steering wheel, and let the attendants guide cars forward. I didn't attempt to watch them on deck or peek into their windows. Cautious people don't slip in public spaces. They slip where shadows and routine protect them. The crossing took its usual quiet minutes. I stayed in my truck, listening to the low churn of water against steel. When the ramp dropped at the island's edge, Ivy drove off ahead, merging into a narrow road swallowed by trees. I followed from afar, keeping just enough distance that I wouldn't be noticed. The road curved into the inland of Vashon Island, past small clusters of homes, fields, and darkening forests. Near Burton, her taillights slowed and turned down a gravel road leading toward a cluster of shoreline cottages, the kind of rentals used by weekend visitors who want privacy and anonymity. She didn't reemerge. I drove past the turnoff, found a public turnout farther down the main road, and parked my truck. From there, I couldn't see the cottages. The trees and bends in the road hid them completely. But I didn't need a direct view. The direction mattered. The disappearance of taillights mattered. The silence mattered. I reclined my seat and slept in broken stretches through the night. The sound has a way of sounding enormous in the dark. Every distant ferry horn, every rustle of branches, every creak in the truck reminding me how quickly a life can split into two paths. At dawn, the windshield was fogged with dew. I wiped it with my sleeve and started the engine just long enough to warm the air. Ivy's car had not come back up the road at any point during the night. It was the kind of detail you can feel even when you can't see it. I spent Saturday moving through the island's towns like a ghost. Dockton, Vashon Heights, the strip of cafes near the Art Center. By late morning, I visited the center itself. The administrator told me the weekend workshop Ivy had mentioned had been canceled due to weather delays. I thanked her and stepped back into the light drizzle. A pattern only stays hidden when nobody checks its edges. Hours passed. The sky dimmed early the way it does near the Sound. Fishermen packed up their gear. Local shops shut their doors. The island settled into its usual quiet. Near the terminal, I waited. And just as the last light began to fade, I saw Ivy's car again, moving toward the lanes for the return ferry. Brent was still in the passenger seat. I observed from a distance through my windshield. Nothing exaggerated, nothing sloppy, just two people who understood the limits of being seen. Then the car stopped briefly. Their heads leaned toward each other, subtle, not dramatic, not careless, just enough to close the space between two people who shouldn't have been alone together. A moment later, the passenger door opened. Brent stepped out. He shut the door quietly and walked toward the dim area near the side parking lot, disappearing into the shadows with practiced calm. Ivy drove forward alone, joining the line for the late ferry back to Tacoma. I waited and boarded the following boat, keeping everything at a distance that allowed me to think clearly. When I returned home that night, my mother was still awake. She said Ivy had come home earlier, heading straight to shower. She said the kids were asleep, that dinner went smoothly, that everything appeared normal. Normal is what people show you when they want their lies to hold. Sunday morning felt like a room rearranged slightly. Same furniture, different meaning. Ivy made pancakes. The kids argued over syrup. I watched her move around the kitchen with the same efficiency she always had, and the silence between us grew into a shape I couldn't ignore. Mom left mid-morning, hugging me longer than usual. My sister called to check in later. Families understand things before words catch up. That afternoon, while organizing the car for the week ahead, I opened the glove compartment to replace a missing charger. A folded slip of paper fell out, a vehicle parking pass, issued to the cottage cluster down in Burton, valid for the exact weekend she was working. Not in her name, not incriminating by itself, but undeniable when paired with everything else I had seen. The ferry records, the lies about the workshop, the silhouettes leaning together, the overnight stay, the turnoff toward the cottages, the early return. I didn't confront Ivy that day. Confrontation turns truth into argument. On Monday, I met a family law attorney in Tacoma. We spoke for less than an hour. He explained the process, the petition, the service, the mandatory waiting period required by Washington. Nothing about it surprised me. We filed for dissolution on grounds that needed none. The petition asked for a parenting plan built around the kids' schools and my daytime work, with overnights balanced and summers shared. A few days later, Ivy was served. The knock came just after dinner. Soft, deliberate, the sound of someone with a job to do. Ivy was wiping the counter when she opened the door. The process server held the envelope with professional neutrality. She took it automatically, shut the door, and stood still in the middle of the kitchen. She looked down at the envelope, then up at me. Her hands trembled. She peeled it open, saw the first page, stopped breathing for a moment. Her voice cracked before she even formed the words. "Darren, it's not what you think. I swear, please, let me explain. It wasn't supposed to be like this." I said nothing. Silence. Not anger. Not contempt. Just certainty. She saw it on my face, the truth that I already knew everything, long before this envelope arrived. Her denial shattered mid-sentence. Her lips pressed together, her shoulders collapsed, and she sank into a chair like gravity had doubled on her. She pressed a hand over her face. She tried to speak again, but couldn't. The words dissolved into a thin, trembling breath. The kids were in the living room drawing, unaware of the seismic shift happening 10 feet away. After a full minute, she lowered her hand and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never thought it would get here." Her eyes were unfocused, the look of someone suddenly realizing that consequences aren't hypothetical. She stayed silent for the rest of the evening. When I went to put the kids to bed, she remained sitting at the edge of the couch, staring into nothing. She slept in the guest room that night. I heard her crying quietly around 2 a.m., muffled, like she didn't want the house to notice. She got up early the next morning, made breakfast for the kids, packed their lunches, and kept her face composed. Not out of manipulation, but because the reality of what she'd done hadn't fully settled into her bones yet. For 2 days, she floated through the house with a quiet, stunned heaviness. No excuses, no attempts at justification, no attempts to win me back. Just a woman sitting with the aftermath she created. On the third day, she came to the living room with a small suitcase. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "I found a temporary place. I'll be leaving this afternoon. I already told the kids it's just for a little while." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for clarity. She didn't ask for another chance. She only asked, "Can I say goodbye to them before I go?" And she did, gently, quietly, without falling apart. She left that evening, not because she was pushed out, but because guilt eventually finds a shape large enough to move a person on its own. I told Teresa and Kara. They came with casseroles and silence, the two best gifts people bring when they love you more than your story. I told Philip and Nora a day later. Nora cried until laughter reclaimed her face, some old muscle memory of surviving what you can't fix. When I sat the kids down, I used language a structure understands. Our family was changing shape, but it would carry the same load. They asked predictable questions, and I answered them. Revenge, to be satisfying, has to be accurate. Brent, as it turned out, was assistant superintendent for the Island School District. He and Ivy shared committees, grant panels, community projects, roles that look harmless until you lay them side by side and see their overlapping boards on the same joist. Most districts have ethical guidelines about relationships where influence or procurement may be involved. Those guidelines are written in calm language, but they care deeply about appearances. I printed the relevant sections and placed them beside the committee rosters that listed both Ivy and Brent as voting members on decisions about arts partnerships. I did not add color commentary. I did not write affair on any page. I wrote conflict of interest review requested. I sent the packet to the district's compliance office and to the arts nonprofit's board chair. I copied no one else. The district opened a review. The nonprofit initiated one, too. No headlines bloomed. No social media sprinted. What happened instead was the quiet machinery of policy. Brent stepped back pending review. Ivy was told not to lead island projects while the audit ran. None of this touched our children's schedules. It did, however, touch the one arena that had sheltered their privacy, the work where they had hidden. The payback arrived not in flames, but forms. The district concluded that Brent had violated policy by failing to disclose a close personal relationship with a member of a partner organization he oversaw. He wasn't fired. He was demoted and reassigned to a role far from partnership approvals. The nonprofit board required Ivy to recuse herself from any vote or project related to Vashon Island for a year and to attend a governance refresher. Their statements were boring in the way procedural justice should be. The interesting part was what didn't happen anymore. There were no more arts weekends. There were no more last boat returns. The formal process began from there. Washington doesn't allow quick endings. It requires a mandatory 90-day waiting period after filing or service before anything can be finalized. With children involved, the timeline stretched a little longer, but the path itself was smooth. Ivy didn't contest. She didn't complicate anything. She cooperated, almost as if she understood that resistance wouldn't rewrite the pattern we had both lived through. I spent those months adjusting to the new rhythm of the house, learning the sound of evenings without her footsteps, learning how silence could feel both heavier and kinder at the same time. Theresa visited often. The kids settled into routines without disruption, maybe because children have a way of trusting stability even when it looks different. When the mandatory period passed and the judge reviewed our agreement, the decree was signed quietly. No confrontation, no courtroom drama, just a final recognition of what had already been true long before any file was opened. I kept the home in primary custody under the parenting plan we submitted. She took alternating weekends. She moved into a small apartment near the waterfront, enough space for her art supplies and the version of her life she could live without deception. I didn't catch them because they were careless. I caught them because I pay attention to patterns. Fairies, schedules that repeat just enough to become true. In Washington, they call divorce a dissolution, as if water wears down rock until it remembers it was sand first. Maybe that's right. We dissolve the marriage without dissolving the kids' lives. If you're looking for revenge that feels like justice, don't set fires. File forms, ask for reviews, use policies written for exactly this kind of quiet wrong. The loudest thing in my story was a stamp on an envelope, and it was more than enough. Thank you for listening. If you found this story worth hearing, please like, share, and subscribe. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in this situation. And until next time, take care.